gonna pull that
I
card.
have the Dunn Community, person. I have horrible handwriting.
I didn't talk to him. We worked him earlier.
I talked to him this morning. It's gonna be all shorthand again, just so you know. It's like everybody on this committee has a last name that starts with M. I always do everything with initials, so I'm doing the minutes last time, and I'm like, I think it's M. Something M. So you didn't give us the minutes yet?
No, I think what I'm gonna do is table it.
Table that till next week.
Yeah, because I didn't have enough time to format them all, so just everything else today.
I don't want to waste meeting time reading them, so.
I think give us plenty of time to review those. Preparation.
Mark will be in.
Mark, what?
Mark was.
Oh, is he coming? Did you see how far away he was?
He's on his way.
We can start with that.
This is it?
Yeah, I thought we were.
We have a quorum.
What do we got, 1, 2,
5 of 8. Good point. And we said Gina's no longer a committee member, so we're down to 8.
One thing I'll ask is if you could just make sure all the red lights are on the keyed mics. We'll just keep them on. We tested it today. I am getting Zoom mics, so 2 Zooms that we can put out, so it'll be a little bit more seamless. We have those meetings, but we won't have those till next week, so. So I'll call the meeting to order at 6:06. I'll call the roll backwards. We're currently missing Gina, we're missing Raquel, and Mark Prince. Who else did we say was missing? That was it, right? And Kate, I'm sorry. So approval of the minutes, item number 2. We're actually going to wait on those because I just got one set today, which we'll format. We have 3 sets. We'll vote on next meeting, and then we'll be caught up, but I will post the drafts. So that way, we're kind of getting our legs here. So moving forward, the expectation is to have those meeting minutes by the next meeting so we can continue to approve those and get them posted as expeditiously as possible. Moving on to new business items, item number 3. So chairperson's report. As you all hopefully know by now, the stage 1 was approved by the school committee by unanimous vote. That's positive because that gave us a little bit of time to have this meeting to kick off a little bit of the stage 2 process. So thank you to the school committee for moving that forward. Phil, we're on track for submitting that? Okay. So it sounds as though we'll have that in on time, so that's good. That's a good first step. Correspondence and ongoing actions report. This was going to be kicked to Kate, but I know that we haven't received any significant correspondence to date, but the website and the email are open, which we'll go over in a minute. But sbc@southkingstownri.com is our email. There's an auto response set up on that email, so anyone who emails us will get an auto response saying, we are monitoring this email box, but we will not respond. So that was at the committee's request. What we will do is, Kate has been assigned a responsibility to bring any correspondence to the committee. We can discuss it, and then we can recommend any actions we'd like on that correspondence. So that mailbox is set up, and we are taking in comments if anybody wants to submit them to the committee. Project-related events since the last school building committee meeting. So I want everyone to know that there was a meeting held yesterday with Mario Carino from RIDE. And it was at my request because I had some questions on reimbursements. So the goal for, I think, everyone is to maximize the reimbursements, right? Especially for the taxpayers. And so I wanted to be clear on what we'd qualify for. I have a significant amount of experience in this. I've been through it before. However, we have particular projects here that may or may not qualify. So I will go through some of what was discussed in that meeting with you, so you're up to date. And then, so it included myself, Raquel, Brian Sylvia, our finance, from the finance people, Kate as the vice chair, me as the chair, Mario Carino. The questions I had of Mario were really related to finances and reimbursements. One of the questions I had was reimbursements for newer and fewer, because the school committee already took action on closing 2 of the schools. There is a 5% reimbursement. I'll actually bring up the bonuses here. Oh, yeah, I said, I wonder if you remember. Oh, okay. Maybe later. So these are the bonuses that are still available. Mario basically stated that, obviously, if we go forward with any substantial enhancements, health and safety and educational enhancements are somewhat of a given, right? That's something given out to most districts. That would count for 10%. I did validate and ask, okay, are we limited at 17.5% additional reimbursement on top of our base rate of 35%? And he responded in the affirmative. The reason for that is the way the state law is written, you can only receive up to half of your base housing rate, which is currently 35% for this community. I was very lucky in Coventry, our base rate was around 40, but now it's 48%. So we were able to qualify for an additional 20% bonuses. Here, the most we would qualify for, we can hope for, is 17.5%. That puts us at 52.5% potential reimbursement if we receive the maximum amount of bonuses under the program, under the current program. The extension that just happened in this last legislative session was the health and safety and educational enhancements. They extended that 1 year to the 23. That's why we have a little bit of a reprieve and ability to recapture those bonuses for the upcoming year. That leaves 4. One of them is newer and fewer. One of the concerns I had, and I iterated to Mario, is since the school committee already took action on Curtis Corner and Wakefield Elementary, will we essentially be penalized for that because we've already taken that action? Would that exempt us from taking this bonus? The answer was no. As long as it's in the stage 1, and Phil or Kate, feel free to chime in and correct me on anything. As long as we have it in our stage 1 report and we acknowledge the fact that these are being consolidated as part of a positive action of the master plan, that it would qualify. Correct? Okay. So that's a positive because that's an additional 5%. That puts us at potential 15%. The other item that was brought up was the replacement. So if you have during a Jacobs study, they had come up with this facility condition index. If you have an FCI over 65%, essentially it's telling you should replace that school. They're encouraging you to replace that school. Mario brought up the fact that Wakefield Elementary and Curtis Corner were the closest ones, and I forget what the utilization is, upwards of 60%, thereabouts, were the closest ones to meet that 65%. The issue with that is, I'm still a little bit unclear, maybe Phil, you can chime in on this, of whether we would even qualify for that because we're not replacing those facilities. Yeah, absolutely, Kate.
So one of the things that he clarified was that you don't need to actually replace, it's not about replacing the building. It's if you take the students from that building and distribute them throughout the rest of your buildings, that would allow us to qualify. So we're taking it, and again, Phil, you may be able to be more eloquent with how I'm saying this, but because we asked him to clarify 2 times because it didn't make logical sense, like you're not replacing the building, but if you're taking the kids from the building and distributing them throughout the other elementary schools, then that does allow us to qualify for this replacement.
I'll get to you in a moment, okay?
Doral, if you, I don't know if you want to. help us here.
Why don't you come on up and just, with us, and just,
So we did ask for clarification because it was a little confusing on whether Mario was explaining the points, but whether we were redundantly using them. And I would say that it's still slightly unclear, but you are correct in that in order to qualify for the replacement, it was a redistribution as an option, but I was not sure whether that redistribution would require improvements to other schools or.
That's actually what it was. If we were redistributing our children to the other elementary schools, we would have to be also improving those schools. You couldn't leave them as is, move the kids. That is where it wouldn't. But I believe the idea is we're going to be touching all those buildings, or in theory, we need to touch all buildings, so.
so that's my general understanding as well, we can clarify that. So what goes along with that is, because Wakefield and Curtis Corner didn't quite make the cut on the 65%, the recommendation was you may want to go ahead and update that facility condition index. The way that works is RIDE has their own consultant. They engage them. Just so happens Coventry is going to be looking at theirs as well, and he recommended that we kind of go out the same time in an RFP with Coventry. RIDE would conduct the FCI. That data would come back to us and potentially qualify us for this reimbursement. It'd be about $15,000 approximately was iterated to us. That was reimbursable if everything works right. So it's something the committee should take into account, we should discuss, because that would have to happen soon if we want to initiate that facility condition index and ask the town or schools to pay for that, because obviously that money has to come from somewhere. It may be a good investment, considering it may qualify us for that extra 5%, which on millions of dollars equates to a lot. So that is the other potential bucket of money that we could tap into. Decreasing overcrowding, we're not really into. Increasing utilization, that one, potentially, right, Phil?
Potentially, yes.
So RIDE is ultimately going to determine what we qualify for, but I think the more buckets that we can show we tap into, it gives them more grounding to qualify us for those incentives when they issue that determination. So, but that was all a positive conversation, so what I got out of that is conducting a facility condition assessment, updating that, and that we would potentially qualify for the newer and fewer, the replacement, the health and safety, educational, and potentially the increase of utilization. But the maximum is 17.5%. That's it. The other, some specific questions I asked, because I'm always concerned about, there was a concept early on that's thrown out as far as what do we do with fields? If, let's say, the high school will remain where it is, or even if it goes to another site, we build new fields. Are fields reimbursable? General answer is yes, if they're new. And they're affiliated with the improvement of the facility. So let's take the high school that's renovated and upgraded, the fields could be reimbursable. If it's a renovation, it's a hard no. So that's something for the committee to think about as we go forward, and that would be a potentially reimbursable item. But we'd go back to RIDE once we have some concepts and say, what do you think? Because we want to kind of be clear, 50% of that money, if that's coming back, that makes a big difference in how that would proceed. Administration, we talked about the fact that once Curtis Corner goes away, depending on what happens with the facility, the administration is currently in an old building. Would it make sense to collapse that into any new facility that we were to build or substantially renovate? So the question I ask is, if we did that, if we were to, let's say, put administration in a hazard building associated with programming or into a new high school, would that be reimbursable? Generally, answer is yes, but they want to see it as an integral part of a new building or something substantial. It can't be that we're just moving administration to move administration. Does that make sense? Am I tracking? Okay.
I just want to make sure everybody understands what he's saying. Like, if we are renovating rebuilding whatever the high school, and we include administration into that build, it's reimbursable, but if it's its own entity, it's not. If that makes sense.
I generally ask this a broad question, and I'm not ceding anything here. I don't want to make that out. But I did ask the question about, we had a discussion about physical plant of the same item. Like if physical plant wanted to move over there and consolidate, and let's say had a couple garage bays on the first floor of the high school since we have so much footprint, or that high school were to move, would that be potentially reimbursable? Just thinking of collapsing facilities and thinking of efficiency. And again, the answer would be yes if it was integrated as part of a larger program. Again, RIDE makes the final determination on that, but they have had cases where they've collapsed some of the administration and physical plant into building footprints and been able to make that work. From a town perspective, I will say, since I sit on the town side, we're also looking at efficiency of buildings, like every square foot of building needs to be maintained. So if we can reduce and maximize, I'm sure it would be preferable, and I can't speak for Jim, but we have to be cautious on all fronts on that. So, what else did we talk about? We talked generally about Curtis Corner. Mario asked what we potentially do for swing space. We identified, obviously Curtis Corner is going to be closing. We could potentially use that, but we talked broadly. I didn't want to get into logistical issues now. I think it's way too early to be talking about that. This meeting was really focused on financials and trying to understand, okay, how do we attack the project from a finance standpoint? Which is why Raquel and Brian were there from that, because as finance people, they need to be knowledgeable going into this as well if we start running numbers. Does anybody did I miss anything? You might.
Did I miss anything?
Say that on the front end.
So the only thing, he was very curious of any sort of visioning that any of us had already. He's like, where do you feel the community's thoughts are? What do you, and it's hard to say, right? Because depending on who you talk to is going to depend on what they would like to see in the future. The discussion did come up at, are we married to Columbia Street? And my sense from previous votes and previous discussion is the community was pretty loud, I thought, with the failure of the last bond, that they want to keep our high school in the middle of town. Like that was pretty clear. I know just from anecdotal conversation with parents, with teachers, with different community members, that ideal situation would be knock it down and rebuild at Columbia Street. But financially, is that something we can do? Right? So there are these different ideas that we exposed him to, as far as there's no one vision that any large group of people have come forward in mass, or that this table has come out with, but it's just different chatter that you've heard throughout. But I do know that he was pretty, kind of, I'll say, pushing towards, you'd like to know where we're pointing our thoughts. So I think that's it.
There was, I did leave out one thing, actually two things. One is on that same high school concept, he gave us general counsel as saying, well, I will say I've had better success replacing schools than renovating, because the public tends to be more in favor of that. Take that for what it's worth. He's from the state, he deals with projects all over the state, every community is different, but he gave us general counsel on saying, renovations, especially because of past construction materials and the unknowns, can get complicated and also are maybe not viewed as favorably. The last item, and I did forget to mention this, is I asked about the cost per square foot. And Phil, you can describe this better. So could you just go over what this means?
So the School Building Authority publishes guidelines that start with the allowable square footage per student enrollment, if you were to build new, for example. And through that formula, the square footage is established based on the enrollment, the projected enrollment for about 5 years from now. Then they have a funding formula for dollars per square foot. And currently for a high school, it's $551 per square foot. That number is currently being reviewed and will be revised and obviously increase. And that's a good thing, because current municipalities that are stuck at the $551 a square foot are struggling and having to reduce the size of their building right now. We don't know what that number is. Mario said we will know it before we make that submission. So that's something we will want to continue to track. And I'll echo what Kate and Luke said, is it's going to be important to keep the school building authority up to date as soon as possible so that they can be a partner in this for you to maximize funding and your reimbursement incentives. The one thing I will add is that they did give us opportunities to maximize the square footage if you were to consider new, by considering the impact of CTE programs, because CTE programs give you more square footage per student. That was a strategy that was used in Newport recently. And he did comment that Newport is building a new school for about 755 students, and Central Falls is building a new high school for about the same amount. So there are some good comparisons out there right now.
And then just lastly, if he brought up, if we demolish the high school and rebuild on that site, if where we place the students would be considered swing space. So say we went and said, okay, we're gonna house the students in Curtis Corner for 2 years while we build a new high school in the same location. Any updates that would have to take place at Curtis Corner would also be reimbursable. So, because my initial thought is, why would you do any updates on a school that you're going to be taking offline regardless? But knowing that was reimbursable also because it's considered swing space. So just something else to keep in the back of our minds. Same rate, it's all the same rate.
The one thing that's important to remember on all this is, as soon as, depending on how we package the product, meaning the projects, once you qualify for a bonus, if you lump that building, let's say newer and fewer, in with the other buildings and projects, that bonus applies to all of the project. So even though if you're touching one building and that one building applies to the bonus, but the rest do not, that bonus applies to everything. So that if we get the 52.5 and we package anything under one project, it'll apply to the total project. If we start picking things out and phasing things, that could be impacted, depending on how we approach it. But that's down the road.
Yeah, I was going to say, he is happy to come and sit and talk with our group, and whenever we need him to, obviously conducive to schedules, because that was one of the questions that I had, was what if we did it in 2 phases, if we wanted to focus on the high school and then focus, and so he'd said that I thought that it was, even if you did it in phases, as long as you're touching all the schools.
You can phase it under the same project. You just can't do one project, finish it, and then move on.
Right, but but if it's right. So that you're not doing everything at the same time. And, but again, I would rather him be here to give more definitive and more clear.
So I'll zip it up on this. We did extend the invite to Mario and said, he said he was glad to attend any of our meetings, come down. So one thing I'd encourage the committee is we should look at the schedule and see when that makes sense. Maybe it makes sense to actually have him here when the council and school committee could also ask questions. I think it'd be good for them to have opportunity. My personal feeling is it'd be good to have them to have an opportunity to ask direct questions about the reimbursements and understand that better. I always think it's better coming directly from the source rather than pass through us. Go ahead, Phil.
If I could add one thing about Mario offering to talk about the financing piece of this, that's very valuable, because I want to make sure you're clear on this. The idea, whatever project or projects are submitted in the stage 2, the goal is to have them all complete within 5 years, all right? And within that 5 years, you can phase projects in. The whole idea of the reimbursement is when you package it for housing aid reimbursement. So you could take 3 or 4 projects and you spread them out over 5 years, if you only apply for housing aid reimbursement at the end of that 5 years, then that is considered the one project that will maximize the reimbursement. So this idea of phasing, it's really 2 tracks. There's a constructability phasing, which is separate from the financing and housing aid reimbursement phasing. And I think that's why you want Mario to come in here and speak to that. Our recommendation has always been, if a municipality is able to manage it financially, you complete all the work and you make one housing aid application to maximize your reimbursement on the total dollar amount. A lot more discussion on that. Best had with Mario involved.
Thank you, Phil. All right, does anybody have any other questions on that particular subtopic?
Yeah, just on the point you made about getting a new FCI, what is the process for us to make that recommendation to the school committee or the town, who's ever funding that?
So that's a good question. There is a form that needs to be submitted to RIDE. We would have to talk about how we would work that, whether the building committee would make a recommendation. Somebody's got to fund it, right? So either needs to be funded from the school side or the town side. Whether it be recommending something on either, and I think I'd consult the town manager and the superintendent on that, maybe offline, to see how we would be able to fund that, whether, we're able to find money on the town side or the school side to get that going.
Could we make that a agenda item for the next meeting?
Yes.
So we can get that moving before
Yep.
we miss that deadline.
Certainly can. All right, anybody else? All right, I'll move on to the last subtopic, which is just an update on project-related events. So I made updates to the school building committee website. It's a process, right? So I posted the stage 1 report. I posted the presentation. I started creating sub-tabs on the left-hand side to start breaking things down. And I started a very rough FAQ. I am looking for input on FAQs. The idea would be that there was a question asked at the school committee meeting. Questions come up. How do you respond to those and how do you document those? Having an FAQ is my recommendation on how we handle that, is documenting these questions as they go, numbering them, and then batching them onto subtopics on the website. So that way, 6 months from now, when that question gets asked again and again, and people start more and more paying attention, they ask the same question again, we can say, refer to question and answer number 3, 5, 7, as opposed to having to re-elaborate on something that's already been discussed ad nauseum. So to that end, I'd be looking for input. If you could email me any questions that you think will come up that from previous process. Also, as we discuss these meetings, if things are identified during these meetings that you think, hey, that is something that should go on the FAQ site, let me know. I'll make sure it gets on there. But I think that's a good methodology of dealing with that. The video streaming, this is being streamed tonight on the YouTube site. The YouTube site is set up. From here on out, for all school building committee meetings, they will be live streamed. Just for the public's knowledge, if it's a joint meeting, it'll likely be on a different site because it would be traditionally held as a town council joint school committee meeting. And that last one was on the school site. So we'll iterate that to the agendas or when it's posted. But on this, what I've included is the link on the agenda, as the school building committee wanted, so that way people can click through on the agenda and get to the live stream site, which is now being hosted on YouTube. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right, I'll kick it out to the public. What I said was I take public comment after each agenda item. I will say, I'd ask any public comment be kept as, succinct as possible. If you have direct comments to the committee, just so we can move it along. I am trying to keep the meetings to 2 hours as a courtesy to both the committee and the public. So I'll open it up to any public comment on that item. Go ahead. And the one thing I will ask is if you can come up to the podium because it's live streamed so everyone can have the benefit. I'm sorry. But so everyone has the benefit of your comments and response.
Do you want my name or anything like that?
Yes, please state your name.
So I'm Carol Vetter. So I just want to clarify, if we qualified for all of the reimbursements, the maximum is 52.5%?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anybody else? Based on what we've discussed so far? Laurel?
Doral Beasley. So Newport and Central Falls are building high schools in the 750 student area. Do you have any idea what the current cost of those projects are projected to be?
Newport is currently about 90% done construction and documentation, so cost estimates are starting to come in. We are involved in that project, so I certainly can bring back data. We are not involved in the Central Falls project, but certainly this committee could reach out to that building committee and, you know, as a courtesy, ask for some information.
Okay, there's the Massachusetts Department of Education has on their website a link to all the projects in the state where you can go and so when you get into it, you'll see the projects, you'll see where they are in the process, you'll see what projects the voters said no to, and it also shows you, with the way it's graphically represented, the approximate cost per square foot. Now, last year, the latest projects that were in the hopper and close to being ready to put a shovel in the ground were like at the minimum, they were $650 a square foot. And that was before the inflation hit. And that was, so we should, we should be ready to see a number that we wouldn't have expected 2 years ago. I mean, when I look back at the prior attempt to do this, they started at $350 a square foot. And when it was all, the stage 2 thing had like 125, this is unbelievable, had $125 per square foot for the elementary schools. It was that bad. All right, the last thing was, if the voters approve, I believe, the voters approve a referendum that's supposed to be on the ballot in November, to add another $250 million for school construction. That $250 million comes with 2 new incentives linked to energy conservation, green technology, LEED gold, LEED platinum, whatever you can get out of the project. So it's like 5%. I think there are 2 more 5. I think there'll be 2 more 5% bonuses available. Which, if you build a new school, that should be a no-brainer.
Thanks, Doral. I will respond to one thing. Doral, it's a good comment on the cost per square foot, which is why we asked RIDE, and they're updating that because it concerns me as well. I know, and one person I can reach out to is on my former building committee. She's actually she's a project manager for Gilbane, and she was the head project lead on the East Providence High School in Alito Hall, who's Phil's acquainted with as well. And she's a great resource. She was a community member in Coventry. She just happened to be on the committee with me. But she is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to construction and cost data. And maybe she'd even be willing to come down and talk to us about currently projects, because she's working on a couple different school projects now. She would be a great resource to come down and give us a tempo of what's going on day in, day out with the schools and inflation. It's not something we can necessarily control. I think it's just something that we're going to have to realize and deal with, and it's part of the data processing of this whole thing. But thank you for the reference to the website. We can look up the mass data. Phil, can you get us the Newport? Okay, send it to SBC at the South Kingstown. We'll get it. Thank you. Yep, Mike, come on up.
Just wanted to echo one point that Kate had made about her sense of the community interest. When we had the school committee's buildings subcommittee, a number of the people on this committee now, Brian, Dave, Chip, and I, did a tour of the high school, and contrary to what had gotten out into the community last year, the consensus, to use, I think it was Dave's phrase, was that the building has good bones. So it's not a matter of having to do an entirely new building. Like Kate said, that might be something that people want to look at, but it's not necessary. And I think that's one of the things that the committee has to not only discuss and resolve, but also at some point get out to the community, whatever that final opinion is.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's a good point, and I think we're going to start creating some framework tonight on the agenda is to give Phil some direction on how we want him to proceed with synthesizing some of the data and start moving forward with options. So with that, if nobody else has any more comments, move on. Okay. So we'll move on to item number 4. So review the stage 1 report. This should be quick. So what else do you need, Phil, for the stage 1? Can you go through the laundry list?
Sure. This evening, what I want to do before we break up will be to get a couple signatures from the superintendent and any outstanding information regarding the school building committee member list. Those are the two outstanding items. And then we will, like I said, before lunchtime tomorrow, submit the package, and I will.
Can we shame anybody if they haven't sent you their resume yet?
I don't think that's necessary. I think, I will be fine. I mean, I have.
due
the
tomorrow.
list. I have the list, so I can gather
I
it
have
from the.
some, and if you haven't gotten them to me, you know who you are. If you could get me a
Seriously?
resume, I would appreciate it.
Stick people.
We are, well, we haven't discussed it, but she's not present, and I haven't heard anything.
Sorry, it's not for the committees to discuss. It's not open for debate.
Well, I do think that with some latitude
Yeah,
given.
you are able to make adjustments. When the school building committee's adjusted, RIDE, SBA just wants a letter saying that the school building committee member list has changed and it is now this, so.
Yeah, I think it can be managed, and we may have adjustments over the life of the project. We'll just have to keep RIDE updated. I don't think it's a critical item. And you need a list with the association of the members, which I have.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Okay.
We continue to make clerical edits. Ones that were brought up at the last meeting, plus any ones that we found ourselves.
And then, as far as the update on facility work items, you had mentioned getting with Brian. Has that occurred? Where are you in that process on updates on anything that's been completed?
So on my end, it's in progress. Just to give everybody some clarity, we're looking at everything we've recently done in the past 5 to 10 years, that might have been identified on Phil's list that we might have done in-house, especially more recently. Working all in-house projects, anything vendor-based, and anything we've done in the last couple of years with the National Grid programs we've done for variable frequency drives, new lighting projects, and upgrades to generators and different electrical components in the buildings. That might have been identified at the time that we've done since Jade has come on board. We're also cross-referencing in my department the list that we presented to school committee last year, which was projects we had identified in-house based on our old master plan, our day-to-day operations, and bringing in different vendors, their expertise, saying, hey, this motor has, the next, couple years on it, or a fire panel, and kind of giving us the status. So we do have a master list in-house that we keep, similar to what Jade Studios presented. So we're kind of cross-referencing that with all Phil's data.
So one thing,
Feel like you
yeah,
have what you need?
well, one thing I'd like to do is I imagine I will have some takeaways this evening. Two things that we want to do before we come back to you is have a meeting with Brian to go over the list together in person so that we can do that, and we can schedule that ourselves for next week. And the other thing is to get a master schedule for the high school, if we could get that. That's the first time you're hearing me say that. That piece of information, and plus my meeting with Brian, in addition to any to-dos that you'll give us, we would like to have that complete before we come back.
You good on that? Chip and Brian, I guess you're on the hot seat on that one. So, all right.
And we can certainly help with that. I just want to make sure, when you're referring to the master schedule, because it can take on two different meanings, are you talking about the bell schedule that we use, or are you talking about where every teacher and student are at a given time?
That's what we want.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else on the stage one? Anything on community on that topic item, number 4? If no, we'll move on. Number 5, so this is where we start getting into stage 2 where the rubber meets the road. I thought it was important to start the discussion. Obviously, we talked a little bit about RIDE's take on the financials, then we have the actual projects, right? So I think it's important that we give Phil what he needs as far as a framework from the committee to start saying, here's what we want you to start looking at. And whether that's different options, at what buildings, exploratory and whatnot, based on some of the data that we have to date. So I'll open it up as far as, I put on here high school, middle school. Obviously, we have elementary schools, school administration and physical plan. I put that on here because I referred to it earlier. I asked those questions. They were answered. Do we want those included as part of any studies? Those are the things that I think we need to start giving Phil some clarity so he can start pivoting into the stage 2 on exploring options and giving us some data on, what these options mean, right? On what I used to call the trash paper, right? The trace concepts. So Phil, do you have any input on that and what you would need for guidance?
No, what I would say is nothing is, off the table right now. I think I can best serve you by just giving you reactions based on data to options you or the community have. For example, if someone says, can we build one elementary that would house all the elementary students? Well, I can take that and I can run some numbers and bring back some information and data for you to digest. So the full gamut of options, and that can be ongoing. You're not going to have all the options tonight. The community hasn't had a chance to share their ideas with you, but the more options you ask us to give you, the more data we can regurgitate back so that you can make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you. So does anybody have any thoughts? I'll put it to the committee on how to approach some of these concepts. Some of you were involved in previous, so.
I just want to know if the school committee has put any guardrails on this. And then you're the only school committee member, or the superintendent's here. Are we able to look at, you seem pretty clear that we're not looking to move the high school. Is that a guardrail that the high school will be in, I'm just trying to define our playing field. The high school will be in Columbia, whether it's a renovation or a brand new school or a combination.
To my knowledge, we haven't put any of those guardrails up.
All right. We could look at a new high school in a different location. Are we able to look at closing additional schools, or are the schools that are being closed the only ones that are closed? Is it possible to close another element? I'm not saying we're doing this. I just want to know what the guardrails are. Do you close another elementary school and build a larger, what Phil was just saying? Do we, not to be mean to anybody, let's say close all 3 and build one new one. Is that something that's off the table, or is that on the table?
Let Mark go first.
That would be an elementary school of close to 1,000 students between the ages of 5 and 11.
I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to
Oh, I
suggest these. I want to know what our guidelines are.
Right, I
If the
understand.
community is saying that there will be 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school, then we can give Phil some better direction.
Right, and I understand what you're saying about, but I'm also understanding the ramifications of one building. So if you look at our current enrollment at Peacedale Elementary School is about 460, somewhere in there. And then you take West Kingston, which is close behind them, about 300 plus, 350, 360. And then Matunic comes in about 210, 212, and you put all together there, you're close to 1,000 kids in one building from a K to 5 setting. I don't know that's the way the community wants to go, even if it's centrally located. You also got to look at the size of the geographic location, where it's a very long, very wide, and so then there are other ramifications with that. If you drop something flap tab in the middle, but you've got 20% down here and 10% over here, 50% over here, then you have now transportation nightmares. So from a program perspective, it's not necessarily the question of, has the committee given you a charge of putting all the elementary age kids in one building? Programmatically, I guess is it the way we want to go in educationally, putting 1,000 elementary age students in one building? If that's not where we want to go, and that's not what we believe programmatically, then let's not entertain that. Let's not put the energy into that area. If we think community schools or neighborhood schools or little cluster schools are the better way to educate elementary age students, then our current model of 3 little clusters would be the better way to go, where you have one in the central, one a little bit out, I don't know if that's northwest or east or whatever. I'll say it's west because it's called West Kingston. And then Matunic down the south, then if that's our current structure based on our beliefs of the community, then let's utilize that structure because we believe that's what the community wants for schooling.
So if I summarize that, it sounds to me that we want 3 elementary schools in the existing locations that they're in.
It makes the most logical sense, because even if we try to pare down to 2, which 2, and then you're again looking at transportation and distance for kindergarten, first grade, you have your 5th grade, 5-year-olds through, like you say, 11-year-olds, they're being transported, and you're trying to look at the landmass. Logic dictates that we should have a smaller school in each area versus trying to do 2. While I understand like that, there are people in the community that believe we should be down to 2. And if we look at numbers, sure, that might make sense, but because of the way our community is so spread out, and unless you've had the luxury of driving to every corner of South Kingstown and trying to get places in a reasonable manner and transporting kids, it's hard to visualize how spread out we are, but sometimes you have to cross Exeter to get back into Kingston in order to get to one person's house. So it is logistically, I would say, not reasonable to try to do 2 schools. But again, my perspective and in conversations with limited groupings that I've had, but if someone came forward with, you know what, this would make sense, and transportation-wise, this would make sense, I think we're open to it. I think it's just a matter of, I don't think we've seen it yet.
I think that
I've come from a land where 1,000 student elementary school is not out of the norm. But those students also walked across the street, all 1,000 of them. So I totally appreciate the transportation needs, and I agree. Not my decision to make. I'm just asking what the school committee and the school, I'm looking at the education side. I'm an engineer. I want to provide my customer the best that they have for their program. So we need to fully understand your program and what decisions have been made, and that's all I'm trying to do here.
From a program perspective, thinking about an elementary school, if you're looking at an average size elementary school of 400 to 500 versus a large elementary school of 1,000, your program is similar yet different, right? Having worked in and been a leader in an elementary school of 1,000 plus students, and then having led elementary schools of 400 and 500 students, educationally speaking, you'll get a better result with a smaller, reasonable, manageable number than 1,000 kids in a giant square, which is more often than not what happens when you put 1,000 kids in an elementary school. They don't often go up, they just give you a giant square on the ground with wasted space in the middle that someone thinks would be nice to plant a tree or some grass that no one then mows or takes care of, and then it grows into be shrubs and wild kingdom. But in someone's long off distant mind, they think it's a wonderful thing, but it becomes wasted space, right? And it doesn't really become conducive to the quality of education you're looking for. So if you want a more of a traditional model, or do you want a more of a forward-thinking, innovative model where you have 4 pods and sharing pods within a cluster? So you have 4 sections of 4th grade, all in one pod, sharing common space and sharing a classroom versus just a long hall full of kids. So I guess that's a better way of asking the question. From an educational perspective, would you, in my mind, it would, thinking of where we're going educationally within the country and within the profession, a smaller pod, connecting pod where you have 4, again, using 4 as a magic number here, 4 spaces, some shared space, some large work group space, some small work group space, some common space, and that is one pod, and then you pod out per grade with gym and art rooms and nurses stations and offices and meeting rooms and OT and PT and speech and so on and so forth. Then you're building an elementary program that's structured in such a way where it's built around your 4 Cs for 21st century instruction, and it's structured in such a way where it's a big school with a small field.
Which we heard on the survey, that's what the community wanted.
So I guess I would go back to that, right? What's our operational charge? Phil said this is a balance, right? We don't have endless amounts of money to do every building. I think what we need to give Phil is like, what's our priorities? So what have we heard so far from the community based on the vote that's already occurred, based on the money we know that it's going to potentially cost? I mean, we're not new to this for the most part, right? We kind of know what the ballparks we're looking at. What is our priority? Is it going to be touching every building, single building? Is it, relocation versus stay? Is it reconstruction versus rehabilitation? I mean, these might be options before we go too far down the road. And then what does the data tell us? And I think Phil can tell us, like, take elementary schools. Did you perceive that there is a major need in the elementary schools to the point where it would require rehabilitation or reconstruction? Because if we're not at a facilities condition index, so even close to 60%, and we have operationally no charge from the school committee, which has already gone through redistricting, to close and consolidate, as a building committee, we start dipping into policy matters, right? We start looking at, all right, let's look at consolidation. Well, it does affect programming. That's a school committee decision. I don't know if that's within our charge. I think we would have to go back to the school committee and say, is that something you want programmatically? My personal opinion.
That would not be the charge of the school building committee.
Right.
And that's what I was trying to define. So
Right. So if we're going to
clearly,
track,
the school committee is leaning towards the 3 elementary schools. We heard additional data from the surveys of the community that they want equity. So as an engineer, I turn that into, we need to have 3 equitable elementary schools and then work from there. How we achieve that is,
so Phil, could we note that down as, is that something we share as a starting point? Is we agree that we'd like to have 3 equitable elementary schools?
I put that out there because right now,
Mark, you'd be good to weigh in on this.
Eastdale is very different than the other 2 elementary schools. They have a gym, the size of it, the services that are available there are different. So as you talked about, you build out the grades, you build out the nurses station, you build out the other pieces of it, the PT, the OT. I would submit that if we're going to do equitable elementary schools, all the elementary schools should have those same opportunities. Doesn't mean it's just fully staffed, but they have the space to perform those functions in each one of the
Right.
schools.
So we're defining, one question would come to mind, okay, how are we defining equity? right? Are we defining it simply by space, which is fine? That's one way to define it. So that's the question to the committee.
I would define it more in the terms of opportunity and educational adequacy, less than space, right? As long as I can get the programmatic and get the outcomes, so that might look a little different for one school versus the other. And I think you gave this a very good answer at the school committee meeting, what's equality versus equity. It doesn't have to look exactly the same, but how the ultimate goal is achieved, right? So,
The goal is giving them what they need. So is that the definition that we're going to use? Because if it's equity parity, meaning you've got a gym at Peacedale and you want equity, then you got to put a gym at Matunic and a gym at West Kingston, right? Then it's equal equity, right? If it's opportunity, is it equitable because the students at Peacedale have indoor and outdoor opportunities where the students at Matunic and West Kingston have limited? They have some indoor opportunity. They have much more outdoor opportunity in nice weather,
Until February.
right? But it's only so much snow sledding you can do in February and January, right? And then to Luke's earlier point, I think one thing that we've mentioned several times, and it kind of needs something we just need to acknowledge and put on the table. Right now, we only have one building that can serve as swing space. So if nothing else, regardless of whatever buildings we do to them, we have to do something to Curtis Corner. Because that's the space that, we can't have kids in a building while there's construction going on. So they need to go somewhere. They have to go to Curtis Corner. And we have to think about that from the perspective of big kids, high school, and little kids. The only other space we have is Wakefield, and, we can't put the high school in Wakefield. So that brings us back to Curtis Corner. So one place we definitely need to start and thinking about is if Curtis Corner is our only actual swing space, then what do those updates look like?
I would say it's, in my opinion, it's a little preemptive because I've gone through projects where swing space can take the shape of different forms, right? That's an enormous high school, and depending on what we do, may have opportunities there to do. I think it needs to be baked up on the swing space after we develop a project, right? I don't know. It's,
I would generally
you know,
do it that way, because there is the possibility, let's say we were gonna renovate the high school. You could hold classes in part of it and renovate part of it. You could renovate parts over the summer so that there was, you have to look at what the total project's gonna be and then determine the staging, the phasing, when the construction window would be versus the school year. So you have, I've renovated lab buildings and not had to relocate people, and kept the science going. It can be done. It's on the back end as.
Right, it can be done, but I'm talking about somebody else's child. We're not talking about, an adult working in a lab. That's all I just want us to be mindful about.
It would always be healthy. I never put anybody in an unhealthy space.
So,
Well, yeah, and I think his point is just to keep it on the radar.
Oh, it's on the radar, but I don't think,
In the forefront.
I guess to Luke's point, I wouldn't make any decisions that we have to do anything to Curtis Corner until we're forced to do something to Curtis Corner for swing space.
so the risk of tailing off, I just want to pull it back in because we
Just one thing that I would caution though is that both East Providence and Lincoln, when we had talked to them, because they had looked at, one was moving out of a building and that was basically falling apart on them, and then another one where they were trying to do the renovation construction thing at the same time. Both school building committees told us that COVID saved them. That they would not have been able to pull it off if all the kids were coming to school. So just something for us to keep in the back of our mind when we get to that place, that it may seem like, oh, this will work, but in both of those cases, they were saying that it probably wouldn't have been able to pull it off under normal circumstances. So It's just something to note.
Thanks, Chip. I'm not trying to squash anyone's comments. I just want to stay on track because I think we have certain things that are going to be discussed throughout the project, right? Tonight, I just want to make sure that Phil walks out of this room with some, so I think you're making some good points. So on the elementary schools, I think we left off of Mark made a very good point. What does equity look like? So what is the answer to that question? Like, if we're going to ask Phil, or do we leave it to Phil to start coming up with concepts and we respond and say, that's not equitable? Right? And we tweak things to make it more equitable. I mean, that's one way to go about it in our mind and start, going through, or do we define everything tonight?
I'm not comfortable defining everything tonight. I'm not gonna lie, being gun shy, because the minute you make a statement, it becomes fact. And so we want to make sure that this is all just ideas, and I feel the need to kind of put that out there and be like, we're just throwing out ideas at the moment. And there's no fact, there's no decision, there's no definitive thing going on here. But, exactly, thank you for live brainstorming, I like it. Because that's what we have to go through this process in order to get to where we want to be. And so I think some of the things that I feel like are known it sounds like, again, logically, 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school is what the vision should be, right? And then, so to feel like that would be the initial, if all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we could visualize maybe 2 elementary schools, that could be an option kind of off to the side, but I would hate to spend too much time if it's not feasible. And then kind of to the point is, are we going to be looking at putting gyms on the 2 other elementary schools? And again, logic has to dictate at some point, yes, they should have gyms. Like we've lived without them for sure, but is it ideal? And it hasn't been ideal. So, so there are different things that I would love ideas to come to us. But then, I would love to see what's the difference between renovating South Kingstown High School versus knocking it down and rebuilding versus looking somewhere else and building new elsewhere. Not that, we don't know which one would be ideal until we vet each of them options out. So I don't want to speak for the rest of the committee, but if someone else wants to chime in.
I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers, but we have to look at a long-term plan here because this town has changed drastically since I've been here, in the 25 years I've been here, and it's going to change, I think it's going to change even more drastically in the next 25 years. So we need to come up with a long-term plan, 2 larger-sized elementary schools or 3 smaller ones, and put substantial money into 2 of them with indoor facilities, gyms. But how's the town going to, we need the ability to adjust in 10 years and 15 years and 25 years so we're not left with buildings that we put money into that will serve no purpose in 25 years or 10 years. So I think these are the things we need to define. Can the town get by with 2 elementary schools? Once again, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I don't want anyone to misconstrue that. Like you said, Dave, we need to think about all the options, because we're not going to be able to do every single thing. When I can't speak for the council, I just don't see $180 million bonding to spread all across the town. So I think we should really look at, like you said, plan A, B, and maybe even a C, including the high school. Knock it down, build a new one, plan B, or a hybrid. Knock down wings. Save what we can. If it appears we have to keep it on Columbia, maybe that would be a great option. I don't know, though, but that's the things I see. All right.
So, I guess from my perspective, what I'm questioning, what I'd like to see is, and I'm just throwing this out there, I would like to understand what is a major renovation, not a minor, major renovation look like, because I know major renovations can make it look like a new school. What is the cost of that? And if we were to keep it on site, do a major renovation, make it essentially look like a renovation, what are the benefits and drawbacks of that concept, including what's the impact on reimbursements? New on that site, what is the benefits, drawbacks, and all the things that go along with a new on that site? And then to answer at a numbers level only right now, because I think you start going down the road, like, there's a lot of logistics with a new high school, right? You got to find a site that works, there's transportation, everything else. Do the numbers work, right? From a share to build a new high school, even whether on-site or off-site, like, do the numbers per square foot and what we're seeing today, what is that number? Because that's part of the decision-making process. So that's where I'm thinking. I'm putting that out for feedback from the committee, because that's not my charge. What do others think about that, and what else can we add on for Phil?
One other thing that I wanted to add about the equity thing was that we're talking about in town, and I think that's important, but what I see from students that are not choosing to come to South Kingstown High School is we really need to think about it in, at least in our region, equity compared to other places, because that's part of why people are choosing not to come to our school, is because they're seeing it as an inferior product building-wise to other places. So I do think we need to think about that part. And the other thing that I just was wondering is there data out there for when you build or significantly renovate something, the percentage of students that that you'll increase your enrollment by? Because there's got to be some type of metric for that, because that's one thing we hear is that if you build it, they will come, that it becomes a situation where people are like, oh, well, this is nice, I'm going to stay here now. So just curious about that, but also thinking about especially our neighbors, but overall where kids might be going.
So Chip, just to follow a couple follow-ups. One is, you mentioned equity among regionally, right? So what does that look like for you? Does that mean specifically to CTE, to certain programs, to, like, what would we be comparing on? Or is it just a fancy building that looks nicer?
Well, it's certainly programmatic, but that's not what we're here necessarily. Indirectly, we're looking at that, but to me, it's the look of the building, the look of the campus. I think the sports fields in other areas definitely play a role into all that, because people are comparing those things, but that's what I see. But yes, our programs and our CTE programs specifically to attract kids from other places are that when they come in, are they wowed by the facilities? Because I do think that that's important too, when they go on tours of other places, that they're seeing like, wow, this is that. We can fix the programmatic stuff, and we're lucky enough, especially with CTE, to have Perkins and categorical funding that assist us with that. But ultimately, a building to match would make a difference, I believe. And I'd like to know, like I said, what kind of data looks like for if you have a facility as good or better than your neighbors, what does that result in kids coming back wise? What can you expect?
To the enrollment point with the elementary schools, we were having an conversation about enrollment at the elementary schools. It's declining. It's going to continue to decline. Birth rates are declining. There's not a lot of elementary age babies coming up. That's different for the high school though, because of the CTE situation. It might not just be our kids coming back, but more kids can come in. So it's like the elementary school, you'll see that data and the statistics show that trend will continue to go down, but it's a different story at the high school level because of the open CTE enrollment.
I had an interesting conversation. I actually met the Coventry superintendent for breakfast this morning. He and I obviously have a relationship, and he was mentioning Coventry shedding to Pontigansett. Very similar situation. Pontigansett is the school to go to for Coventry, but similar situation here. A lot of parallels between the districts, so I look at that. One of the things he mentioned is Father Doyle, which is a local parochial school. What they found was a major uptick from the parochials and charters and others going not to the high school but to other, because of the perception of the high school. And they have a very robust CTE program. They were originally a regional career and tech center and have expanded since then. I think they have over 20 programs now. They can't seem to retain those kids. And a lot of it goes to the perception of the school. Not necessarily the programs, it's the type of programs. So it's something I mention that because I don't think we're unique in that. I think it's something that has to be looked at statewide. But Chip, to your point, it's about the perception also of the facilities and the programming within it. So some of it we can control, some of it we can't.
Chip, to your point,
Go ahead.
Massachusetts is just a neighbor next door, but one of the things that we found when renovating a project in Massachusetts, one of the things we built in was for additional 5%. But it was based on two conceptual frameworks, one being, can we change office space or meeting space into a classroom if we had to add a classroom, right? That was one kind of conceptual piece. But the other piece was, believe it or not, the toilets. We add 5% more people. How many more bathrooms, how many more flushes, how much more water, those sort of things. Like, and I can't remember the piping and the size of the piping and all that other stuff, but believe it or not, that's one of the things that we kind of got logged in on and having a discussion about was if additional 5% come, what do we do? And in certain communities, particular in Newton and Wellesley and Weston and those communities and some communities on the North Shore, when they've built and renovated and had brand new schools, they came back and 2 years later, 3 years later, they were building additions. Right, so I don't know if we're in that kind of category, but I do think, I think to your question, is there a magic number? I don't know if there's a magic number, but maybe how we should be thinking about it is flexible spacing. Like if the number grows in such a way, can we take this office space, move it over here, move this over here, and boom, we have a classroom.
So what we have so far is new build, renovate, numbers for off-site. Sounds like what you had said was kind of in alignment with that. Can we get data on, does RIDE have any anecdotal data on new renovations? Like, a lot of these buildings in Rhode Island are fairly new. So now North Kingstown and Barrington on the middle school, North Kingstown was done a dozen years ago. So, I mean, it might be, I will say this, my daughter goes to North Kingstown, I live in Coventry. We chose it partly because when I walked into that facility, I was like, this is where my daughter's going. So anecdotally, I can tell you as a parent of a freshman in high school, I am trucking her there every morning, very inconvenient for me. But I can tell you as a parent, I felt that was the best choice, and part of that decision was facility. So, now if there's any grounded data in that, I think that would be helpful, beyond a father sitting at the table here, but, so there's that. Other things we want Phil to explore. Let's stick on the high school. As far as the high school is concerned.
Are we including, since we're putting everything on the table, athletic facilities into that? Like, what does it cost? What would it look like? I think it makes sense. We have
That's a huge piece right now. It's a huge piece right now, right? Because can our track be used at the moment for meets? Okay, that's a problem.
Tomorrow we're playing our home football game in North Kingstown.
Right, and so, and that I'm assuming is due to the swamp. It's called the swamp for a reason. But even the soccer field, my understanding, is not regulation. So there are so many reasons, why that needs to be explored. Yeah. I do want to also, and I don't know that it's necessarily part of this conversation, but it's something I brought up with superintendent, is that we need to also include URI in our conversations when it comes to our athletic fields, because, and this is just a little, put an asterisk, URI has an indoor track that our students make use of. They do not have an outdoor track. If we had an outdoor track that could host collegiate sport, there can be a partnership between URI. Except Mr. Beasley says no, but that's okay.
URI is in the process of trying to build an outdoor track. So.
Well, anyway, we still need to explore our
yeah, no, it's worth
opportunity.
exploring.
And
I just wanted to
yeah.
comment on what Chip was saying about surrounding communities and what's equitable for the high school, since we're on the high school topic. And I think what came clear in the last discussion, and I've heard countless points, is that we don't have that campus feel high school. We all know our high school is too big for the number of students we have. And I would just charge to Phil that when you're looking at putting a high school there, a new high school or any kind of hybrid renovation, that we do look to go vertical to try to open up some land around the school for some at least for the PE programs, if not not, you know, maybe we can't get a full stadium there, you know, but at least for the PE program, so they have adequate space outside, or just that campus feel for outdoor classrooms, things that we don't have that we heard that we really wanted. And if we were also to look at a brand-new school at a separate site, I would, you know, suggest that we do the same thing. And partially for cost, one thing we saw with the old plan was just one-story sprawl because that was the cheap solution. And they took good land at Curtis Corner and turned it all into impervious surfaces. So you talk about environmental sensitivity, but they were going for the cheap, no elevator approach. If we're looking at any kind of high school, I think you need to go vertical because I think there's a lot to be said for those exterior spaces. And even if you have to go down a flight of stairs to get to them, it's better than having to walk, I think what Mark said, across a hallway that's 1,000 feet long. So I think whatever we do, I know you're just going to do boxes to some degree and cost per square foot, but don't do those boxes on the, you know, go vertical when you can to open up that space. And same with the elementary schools. I mean, yeah, we can put a gymnasium, but there's aren't, like, even if I know West Kingston has a lot of land behind it, but it's not town land. So we don't want to sprawl out the elementary schools either. We want to give them some space, some open space. My opinion.
We actually put the pool on the high school 4th floor.
We had a pool, during the rainstorm, we had a pool. That's true. Yeah, on the roof.
Here's a question. Has there ever been any discussion about a prefab school?
Not that I'm aware of. Prefab school, I don't think so. The other thing I think to keep on the radar, and it was a kind of off cuff about hazard. What do we do with hazard? Do we look at that, and does that get looked at as, you know, do we put the preschool in there? Do we incorporate it as an early learning kind of center that could be tied into programmatic CTE program at the high school? Another option is including that in the mix too, I guess.
Is that historic?
I would like to think so, but you'd have to ask the town, but I don't know. But I would think that it should be.
I don't think anybody wants to see it torn down.
No,
So when you're
no,
doing your
no.
design, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just, again, I'm trying to help them out.
What parameters there, yeah.
Yeah, put you in a box. So.
Yeah.
I was interested to see, because administration would seem to fit well into something like that, since it's away from the school, and, but it would probably have to be blended with some programmatic elements in order to be reimbursable. So what would that look like versus putting in the building footprint and maybe doing, and Mark, you know, I don't want to speak for the schools either. From the town, this is my lens of efficiency, right? You're going to have a freestanding building at Curtis Corner, which really doesn't relate. Would it be, in my mind, it would make sense to collapse everything into a central facility. But I'm putting that out there for feedback. Do we want Phil to look at that? I don't want that to be my charge.
It would be hard to get a fire inspector to sign off on putting 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in a 4-story building. So if you're saying you're going to put a preschool at Hazard,
Oh, no.
a 4-story building, that's not gonna happen.
Administration.
Oh, administration?
Administration.
There's some very,
There's a difference.
we all have difficulty going upstairs with that 3
Not
and
pre-K.
that like 73, right?
But you know what? That's a good point as well. So there's administration, I talked about physical plant, and then there's also this pre-K component, which has been, so one of the things that was brought up in our meeting was Mario said, oh, East Providence, which I visited before they did the renovation. I used to do consulting work with pre-Ks. They had a blended program, and sometimes they blended with CTEs. So, but I have no idea how that relates to program, but that's another element. Do we want to incorporate that? So there's 3 things right there that, does the committee want to kind of have subsets for Phil to explore? Could it be done? What's the subset cost? Feasibility. Don't all answer at once.
Take it.
I mean, yes. I mean,
Is that a yes? I mean, it doesn't hurt to put it down. Is there any strong objection to exploring those
no,
options?
I think we need to explore them, because could it be done and should it be done are two different things, but you have to explore them and look at it and say, should this, okay, it can be, but just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I think we should look at them. I mean, we're
We
gonna,
have to.
this first round, we need to cast a
You
wide
have to
net.
look at everything.
Bill's gonna come back with some numbers, and that is gonna probably cut off some of the edges.
Yeah.
You know, if one of the options we just came up with is gonna cost $200 million, the town manager's gonna, you know.
It's not an option anymore, yeah.
So I think right now we cast a large net, and if a brand new, beautiful high school in a new location with a lake that we dig out is the answer, and it comes out to 250 million, then we never have to look at that again.
Right. So Phil, doable? So
Yeah,
look
and I
at,
think to just expand upon that, I don't think we want to only make it about cost. So as I've been sitting here, I've sort of developed a matrix that I think we want to identify these options and look at them through a couple different lenses. Cost is one, impact to program, transportation, equity, the logistics associated with that solution, the impact of enrollment decline, and the impact of regional perception. So, you know, I may come up with a couple more, but I think if I present to you some of the options based on what we've heard about the elementary schools, the high school, the Hazard Building, and you have these categories to sort of filter them, you know, when you shake it all out, after the, you know, next meeting, you may have some more viable options to really sink your teeth into.
I don't know if it's feasible, but can we have like impact to environment as well? I mean, there was just, I was just on 108 with the monsoon that hit us, and they have the Dollar General that was put in, and it was this obvious and distinct impact on the water and the road on 108, and granted it was crazy rain, but there was the way that building was built and the way the pitches, there was flooding where I've never seen flooding before. So just something to make sure we kind of keep that wasn't being factored in the old plan. That was a huge problem with the old plan. It was like, oh, we can do this, 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 and it's like, no, like I said, the football field's called the swamp for a reason, because it wasn't factored in that flooding happens. And it may only happen once every couple of years, but damage gets done, so.
Can I ask a clarifying question? When you say regionalization or impact on regionalization, what exactly do we mean?
I didn't say it, so I don't know.
is that Chips?
I think that came from maybe it was just worded differently, but
I think I do a perception.
perception of our school in the region and how that impacts our school and people's decision to send their kids to our school.
It's more of a comparison.
Versing for something new or something renovated to look new, wouldn't that help eliminate some of that perception? Okay, I'm just wondering how one would weight that in the matrix. Because we're doing something to the actual building now. Leaving it alone would continue the perception. Right, doing nothing. Doing something changes it.
I guess the way you could weight that is, just in my mind's eye, is you go to the community next door, they have a brand-new, state-of-the-art, 21st century school facility. We look at a rehab that kind of gets it halfway there. How are we comparing with that on our option? You know, if everyone around us is sort of halfway there, but old facilities that were rehabbed, you know, we'll compare if we do a rehab, but if we do a new facility that's state-of-the-art, we're going to be far above. So maybe that may be a way to.
So what's those, what's that region? What are those places?
So where are you losing people now?
Right, but what are those, like, we can't compare a grape to a grapefruit and say they're both grapes, right? So let's call them what they are. If we want to say how this new building is going to compare against Narragansett, then let's say it. If we want to say how it's going to compare against Jamestown, North Kingstown, whatever we want, let's just say it. So we have a parameter for what we're doing, so everyone's understanding is the same thing, because my mind was going someplace else with regionalization.
I think it's our neighbors, our direct neighbors.
So do we also include, so there's no doubt that it's Narragansett, there's no doubt it's North Kingstown, there's no doubt that it's Charahoe, and then, to me, there's no doubt that it's Prout. And if for no other reason, I mean, we can even go out of our region and say it's LaSalle. So, I mean, we could say just maybe even more so where are our students going?
Right, and I'll add one other piece to this, which is somewhat arrogant of me, but I'm going to say it. We can take care of the stuff inside the building.
Yes.
And we can make it better, stronger, faster, leaner, meaner, smarter, cuter, prettier, dancing, singing, clapping, RICAS accelerating, AP accelerating off to big university, right? We can do that. And we acknowledge that there are some things we do really well, and there are some things in areas that we need to bump up. And that's okay. We know where those bumps and bruises and pimples are, and we're working on that. So the programmatic stuff of what happens indoors isn't, I can handle that. What I'm more concerned about here when thinking about what's happening in there is that if we are going to compare ourselves at a physical being to North Kingston, for example, because you took your kid there for that, and I didn't even know they had a new building, so I'm learning something new. I thought it was a couple of years old, but I guess it's new old.
New in relative terms.
It's newer considering.
It's a dozen years old, but new for,
Okay, all right, so we're in the same age group there with that. So when I look and I think, yes, they have a new building, but programming-wise, what's going on in that building compared to what's going on in our buildings, I think our buildings are better. I think what we're producing, the rate that we're teaching, the engagement of some kids and some families, I think we have a better product. So when we're talking about regional comparisons, we're talking about prettier.
yeah, I think you're right. Like, we're looking at the physical bones of what we're charged with, right? We're a building committee. School committee's charged with programmatic and doing the policies and everything for that. So we really can't get into that assessment. That's a school committee assessment. So I think what we can do is look at, okay, in terms of physical adequacy of the facilities, how do we compare? Perceptively, right? If you were to talk to the average parent, do you think our school's as good as North Kingstown's facility? When you went up to it and you explored it, forget about programs. When I took the tour that first night, I didn't know about the programs. I was learning about them. But as I go through the large open spaces and the glass atrium and the place where they say they go outside and eat lunch, as a parent, I say that is important to me. So I do, Mark, it's to your point. I think you're exactly right. It is a physical comparison, not a programmatic or adequacy comparison as far as education. Are we agreed on that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Do you want to do a quick time check at 7:30?
Yeah, so 7:30 time check. So here's my ask, Phil, because in the interest of time, we have a couple more topics I want to give some public comment. We don't have to figure all of this out tonight. We're going to continue to ask for options. So I would probably say at this point, Phil, you have quite a bit of work to do just on what we've given you, right? It's quite a few options. And we're probably going to have more, right? Because we're going to see those options, and I'm going to spit more back at you, I would expect. So are we good with leaving it at that on that agenda item at this point? Okay. So we'll end that agenda topic item. I will put it out for a brief public comment. Come on up to the mic, please.
So I just wanted to say, I don't think the school committee has taken anything off the table. I think that we are looking to you to vet all the options, and so like Dave said, cast a wide net. But I do agree with Kate. I think that we have heard, and if you look at the referendum, it kind of says that people like having the high school in town. So we have heard that. But I think otherwise, we're open. But I want to echo what Jim said, because we have declining enrollment. And if you look at the DensTech numbers, we're going to continue to have declining enrollment, probably at the rate of 22% over the next 10 years. So we're not looking at 1,000 kids in the elementary schools. We're looking at 850, 800 kids. So I think there are options, and I don't think we should neglect either one. Is the option, we have to right size our schools, we have a challenge because we have 1 large elementary schools and 2 small. So do we right size Peacedale and have equity with then 3 small elementary schools to fit that 850 kids? Or do we go to a 2 elementary school model at that, 425 capacity, because Peacedale's a 600 capacity school? So I think that those are great options, and we need to vet them all. But we do need to keep in mind the declining enrollment, because otherwise we're going to end up with the Broad Rock effect, and we're going to have two buildings that we don't need, that we have to close and redistrict, and we don't want to have to go through all of that as a community again. And then I want to mention Broad Rock. So even though Broad Rock's newer, it's not conducive to 21st century learning. I go into that library, and it's a library, like it was in 1990. There are encyclopedias on the shelves. So I think we need to look at repurposing the spaces inside Broad Rock. The one that just sticks out in my mind is when I walk into the robotics room. Well, it's housed inside the home ec room, and it's pretty deplorable that you've got kids working around cooking stations and things, because we just don't have those programs anymore. So let's not forget Broad Rock in our conversation too, because we do need to repurpose spaces inside that building. Thanks.
Thanks. That's actually really good feedback. So,
Cooking back.
home ec. I learned how to sew.
I want to sew a pillow.
Yeah, I still have projects. But that's great feedback. I guess one thing to the committee to consider is, would we want Phil to at least give us a list of, it doesn't have to be drawings, right? A list of things that you see at the next meeting to say, here's the things that we see as requiring upgrade. Right, so that's a fairly easy list. And then the second one would be, and this was brought up by the town manager, I do think that numbers-wise, just looking at what would consolidation look like based on population data alone. So don't get into concepts, but say, what does the data tell us? Like, and when is the nexus point of saying, do we have to do it now? Or where's the logical point where population would say you would do something like that? And then we can at least discuss it based on data and programmatic and everything else. And so that's a thought to the committee. I'm throwing it out there, but at least it's a good way to start the conversation without going too far down the road, right? Because a lot of this is based on school population.
And just be careful with population, because making sure that we're talking about school and family population, because we may have a population, and I use the term loosely, explosion in like southern Route 1 area, but they're 65 and older, right? So we want to know where our families are going to be. And right now, most of the people coming in are not with large families. So
Does everyone agree with that approach? I'm throwing it out there. But it might be a good entry for discussion at our next or upcoming meetings to just start. Mike?
I think Deb won.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Deb.
Three different things. David mentioned the concept of campus feel, and I wanted to bring back a subject that was discussed last December with the school committee group, was looking at Hazard Field next to the high school. There seems to be a universal perception that nothing can ever be done with Hazard Field and the high school. When I asked why, nobody had a really good answer. I asked Terry Murphy to dig out the file on Hazard Field going back to the 1970s. The federal government gave the town a $30,000 grant, and the quid pro quo was it'll be used for practice, but there won't be athletic events used in the field by the high school permanently. That was through, the grant was through the Department of Interior. Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management manages it, checks every year, because there are multiple fields and park facilities in town that this applies to. But I talked to the person who's currently involved, and two things you need to know. One, they are very flexible. If you're doing construction related to the high school, you can use that space during construction. You just need to coordinate with them. Second is, there may be ways of working out a different arrangement with the Department of Interior so that you can use that field as an athletic complex or field. In order to have the campus field, have the athletic facilities, I'd suggest that the committee at some point talk in detail with Terry Lynch about this, because it's a subject worth pursuing. The only question I never got the answer to, and it would take more research, is there even sufficient square footage at Hazard Field if you could turn it into something permanent? But it's worth the committee looking at so that you're not always busing the kids elsewhere for athletic events.
So question on that is it just strictly, can it be only used for, as a field, as a park?
As of right now, my understanding and from that
That's what I thought, okay.
So I have that file on my desk, it's like that thick, right?
Okay.
So I did get it from Terry, and I actually had Carol, you see some boards here that hopefully we can start using, I laminated them. Hazard Field, that map is based on the deed description that was at the time. So Carol had that data from previous process, so I guess to your point, I think it's something we're gonna research more in depth. The good thing is the DEM manager, Paul Jordan, who handles it lives in town, is on the planning board, and is very sympathetic to our needs. So I think they've been very good on, we're working on another project that involves a land swap, and I think that's something that could definitely be explored.
Yeah, Paul was who I talked to last fall. Second thing about CTE and kids making choices and going out of town, I think the crux that you hit on is the difference between programmatic perception or issues and shiny object and what's more attractive. There was, I thought, legislation that was passed that said programmatically, if you have a program, just for example, carpentry in your town, the kids can't choose to go and do carpentry in another town and have us pay for it.
Correct, to a point. There's an assessment system going on to provide that once it comes out and they can do a comparison, if you have a comparable program, you'll be required to stay.
That's fine. The third point I wanted to make, to follow up on what Kate and Carol said, we got projections at the school committee in September of last year saying that we can expect a 20% drop in enrollment further in the next 10 years. In December of 21, they changed that somewhat, moderating it to 15 to 20%. And there is always a disclaimer in those reports that once you get past 4 or 5 years, don't hold us to these numbers. So things can change. But one of the things that I read into both of those NESDEC reports is it didn't really take into account, because it's not the nature of how they do their projections, the potential impact of a falling birth rate resulting from COVID and the economic downturn in 2021, at least for the cohorts that are going to come in the next few years. So it could be substantially higher.
I guess the only amendment, like, it's tough to project, would be, I mean, we can also ask for building permit data and stuff like that. That's one way to predict, and also ask Jimmy Gorman to just, anecdotally weigh in on what's being built and who's being filled in the houses. Like, the NESDEC's really the go-to, and fortunately right now it's not always accurate. Deb?
Thank you, Luke. Well, I do appreciate all the brainstorming. I think it's very, very important. I just want to go back to a point we've heard several times. In 2018, when we started the school building project, we had a plan. 4 years later, a whole lot of money got spent, that none of which is usable, and we're almost back to the very same plan. So the community, I feel, one, is tired and is hopeful that we're going to do something. Spoke to people yesterday who want facilities for their high schoolers. They want to have a community of learners. They didn't care about the facility. they said, for lack of a summary word, they didn't want the brain drain. They didn't want kids to go to other districts. Their kids were going to stay, but they wanted to have classes, full classes of their peers, so classes could run. I want to caution you about looking at any other location other than Columbia Street, because we heard from the community many things with the school bond. Many people who live in the surrounding area want the high school to remain a high school. Moving the high school to another location, you ignite another neighborhood who doesn't want that. There are major traffic changes that would happen on South Road, a light, the park is going to get disrupted. There was a lot there. I feel very sad that we didn't use that COVID opportunity. We would be in a brand-new high school. Had that plan, for all the reasons we all know, and I won't say, got upended. We would be having a new high school. We would have a facility. Hopefully, we can do that now, but I don't want to spend a lot of time doing something that's going to create a lot of angst in the community, angst at these meetings, and it will slow down the important work for that family who just really wants their kids to have a community of learners. They said, we don't even care about the facility as much as we want something that other kids want to stay at. So the bond for me didn't pass for a number of layered reasons, just what I just said. Not only the price tag or the location, but you're changing what the fabric of the town is like. And we heard clearly from people all over, how do I vote to save the high school and keep it at Columbia Street? People came in with that question that day. So that sentimentality really resonates with me, that we as a community want what we have, and we probably would make different choices to keep it there and protect it. So I just don't want to have a whole lot of misdirection of the work of this committee when I feel like the community wants something else. So, and I appreciate what Kate said earlier. You can ask any one person what they think. That's an N of one. That is not a collective. I mean, we all like a different thing, and we would all want something different. We need to think about what the collective would be good for. And I do think about declining enrollment and really thinking about the right size of all of the schools. And I think if we're really truly looking at under 900 elementary schools, we might want to look at a reconfiguration. And that makes sense, because I don't know what the cost of a gym is. So is the gym able to fund classrooms and expand one school? So I don't, that's what I would be interested to knowing, because I want to think, like Jim says, in 25 years, this has to last 25 to 30 years, has to be a reasonable fit for that time period. So I just don't want to lose focus, because we lost 4 years, and we would have a brand new high school. We would have a renovated Columbia Street had we not pivoted. And I saw how difficult, once we went that way, there was no way to redirect the committee or the school committee, and we lost time. And like COVID, the kids would have been out for the year, and we would have been able to meet the challenge better. So I just caution you to not discard that community voice, that crazy percentage of 70-30, I think, which shocked every person in the community, no matter which side you were on. And this is a community of educated professionals, and URI is the largest employer. We have all of the faculty, we all of the staff that live here. They wouldn't turn that down. So I just caution you to read the community that was just 1 year ago. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing I was saying, and there's people here have more perspective than even I do, but I think the intent is it's due February 15th, so regardless, we have an aggressive time frame. I think the intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is to do a data, what we want to show is we're looking at the data and making a logical decision, right? Not just saying, well, the community voted this way, so that must be it. We're going to, looking at the data, trying to do it quickly. We may come to those same conclusions, move on very quickly, but I think it shows process. So when people allege, like the last process, like we either weren't heard, or what did you even look at? What did the data tell us? We can say with an honest face, we did look at it. It just didn't make sense. You know, the data wasn't telling us that's the direction to go. and go back to the meeting, which is recorded, and we discussed this. But I, to your point, Deb, I think we do need to be respectful of the community opinions that are out there, and I think that's going to be a big part of the decision process as we go forward, so. Yeah, well, we have to be cognizant of that. Ultimately, it falls on people who've got to vote for the financing, so, absolutely.
I'm Mary Beth Keating, and what I was going to say before you said it is that data tells the story. And I think casting a wide net at this point is really important because I've heard awesome brainstorming. I heard people say that historically rebuilding is more cost effective than renovation. I heard we need to think long term. I heard you guys talk about the numbers of students in the buildings, and I heard you talk about equity. I heard you talk about wanting to market ourselves better to more communities. And I know that when younger students begin learning together, they also feel less different being together. I know that the Curtis Corner land is our greatest land asset in this community. When you think about the programmatic piece, I don't necessarily think we need to only think about 3 elementary schools, but we could consider, and that program piece is huge in this conversation, having a pre-K through 2 and a 3 through 5. And if you put the pre-K through 2 close to wherever you do the high school, you're going to be able to create a CTE program and early childhood, like you guys talked about, having a hazard. But it's going to be in a building that doesn't have 4 floors, that's not a fire hazard. And you're also going to be able to, one of our issues we're having right now is personnel. And if you had an early childhood program where you were cultivating teachers' assistants, wouldn't that be magical? So we would be building in, and then kids having jobs out of high school. There's a lot of pieces to think about. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit. I wrote a couple more things down. Yeah, the last thing was just the campus field, right? And those fields that already are in existence, although they might not be in great shape at Curtis Corner, how do we look at that, again, looking at every option that's been put on the table and really letting consultants come back to us with strong data that we can then use to make an informed decision versus an emotional decision. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
We have 9 minutes left.
Yeah, I was going to say, we do have a time check. Doral, if you could just keep it reasonable, because I'm trying to keep these to 2 hours, and I have one more agenda topic.
Okay. In the 2001-2002 school year, there were, this is October 1st data, there were 4,344 students in our schools. And in East Greenwich, there were 2,444 students in their schools. So 21 years ago, we had 1,900 more students in our schools than East Greenwich. When the October 1st enrollment numbers come out next month, we're going to find that East Greenwich has more students in their schools than we do. But their school budget is $45 million, and ours is 69. I don't want, hold on.
I just say,
No, hold on.
the agenda topic, like.
No,
we're
this
talking about
is
buildings.
an agenda topic, okay? Because I was told, all during the, and Kate can verify this, all during the last go-around with RGB, every time I brought up the money and how you're gonna finance it, they told me it wasn't the school building committee's purview. That's nonsense, okay, number one. When you factor out the fact that East Greenwich has the salary scale and the transportation, that 24 million comes down to about 20. So there's $20 million difference between our two districts. That's where the money comes from to fix our schools. I don't want to hear that we can't afford it. Do not say that we cannot afford to do this. We can afford it because that $20 million, that's where the money has to come out of, number one. All right, now, Mr. Conti, his head must be spinning. All the things you just, in the last 45 minutes, you've told him to go out and do. The Jacob report says school building authority expects whatever you do. These are 50-year fixes. That's how it was written for the Jacobs report stuff. So if you go out and fix your buildings or build a new school, they expect that to last for 50 years. The high school at Columbia Street was built in 55. In 2025, which is about when your construction might be over, theoretically, it'll be 7 years old. So now you're going to want that building to last for another 50 years to 2075, when it'll be 120 years old. The reason I bring that up is because the report that Mr. Conti gave to the school committee on Tuesday said that the high school by itself needs $50 million in renovations, basic maintenance over the next decade. $50 million to keep that school just operational. Now, if you want to keep it at Columbia Street, then you have to also add your programmatic money for your programmatic changes, because there are no programmatic changes in that $50 million. There's no knocking down walls, there's no new CTE spaces, there's no nothing. And on top of that, you have a building, 234,000 square feet. A school the size of what the projected enrollment is going to be in 5 years is going to be two-thirds of that, for about 156,000 square feet. So a whole 1/3 of that complex on Columbia Street is not going to be touched. And basically what that is the 3-story 1995 addition, and then the cafeteria. When you take all that off and put it to the side, that's what you have left. That's about approximately what your school size would be. I think you should take off the table right from the get-go that you're going to knock that entire thing down as building a school here, please.
Dora, I need to ask you to kind of zip it up, please. Because we have one other topic on the agenda. I registered the...
Okay, just 1 second, I'm just looking at my list here.
And keep in mind, we have a lot of discussions, we'll be talking about the high school exclusively, and you're welcome to provide written comment. You know, we will bring it up.
Lastly, I have on this drawing here a possible solution to where the high school could go, to keep the high school in Wakefield, to create a junior senior high complex, something that we've always wanted to have here. Do you want to see it?
So this is not the time to start rolling out options, right? This is a time for general comment. Here's what I'll say. I'm more than glad to meet with you separately as a chair to look at what you have and also bring it to the committee as a formal agenda item. So that way you can rest assured that it's vetted, but we don't have time tonight and it wasn't on the agenda to start looking at concepts.
I want to present it to the committee.
Could I recommend that you just scan it and forward it into the school building committee email? And then we'd all see it.
Doral, can you do that? Scan it and get it into the SBC at southkingstonri.com? And if not, I'm more than glad to do it for you. Come see me.
I can do it, but I'll have to think about it.
And I'll accommodate that. All right, thank you.
That way we'd all get it at the same time, we'd all get a chance to look.
Yeah, I do think, listen, we're open to suggestions, but I think it's preemptive to say taking ideas off the table. I think what we've already said is, let's keep the ideas on until they're vetted, and then we'll.
I mean, while we're casting a wide net, if anybody's listening out, and if there's any viewers still watching, I mean, anybody that wants to submit for public comment, correspondence through the email, Kate would get it, and she could present it to Phil and the rest of us, and it may be plausible, it may not be, but if we at least see it, that way everybody's got an idea, we can at least see. Right now, just to summarize as described tonight and keep us on schedule, what I heard, and which is going in the notes for Phil, amongst the other ideas that Phil comes up with, we're asking for the options of a renovated or partially renovated high school at Columbia Street, a new high school at Columbia Street, 3 elementary schools. I'm hearing a 2 elementary school option.
Numbers.
Right.
General, right?
General. Broad Rock, 21st century upgrades, hazard, a question mark for multiple uses, and athletic fields. So those are what I'm hearing to charge you, and then whatever other things that data sends you or your firm creative activity or minds comes up with. Am I missing anything that we wanted to definitely have as an option?
That's consistent with my list. The only thing I added to the bottom of that list was, at a high level, any improvements to Curtis Corner to support as a swing space option. That's the only thing I've added to the bottom of the priority list.
All right, thank you for the summary. Item 6, I'm going to touch on it very, very quick. I did have a conversation with Kate talking about finances. From the town side, and I'm throwing this out there for future discussion, is one of the things that I found frustrating sometimes when you get into these projects is the inability for either finance director from town or school side to be able to start quantifying some of the analyzing of cost savings and nuance that come along with school construction, whether it be consolidation options, whether it be energy efficiency, et cetera. So one of the things that I think maybe on a future agenda item is whether we would hire an outside financial analyst to specifically calculate and look at that, somebody who's good at looking at schools specifically, calculating what the costs are to both build, but also the recapture rates. Because I know that question comes up often is, well, what are you going to save if you rebuild versus rehabilitate? Or it's something I'm throwing out there for consideration at a future agenda item. Doesn't have to be discussed tonight. It's a morsel. I think we had communication and public outreach. Does everyone feel sufficient they got some time in? I will say we're looking to zip it up. I promise to stay on mark. We're a little over. But I would remind everybody, we won't pay lip service to emails that you send. They will be read. They will be cataloged. We will consider them as a committee. So don't feel like you have to be here. If you can't make a meeting, sbc@southkingstownri.com. Submit that way. We will make sure that it gets considered, and then you can certainly, for anybody listening, can follow up in person. And we're all ears.
To that topic, we had an email that was sent to us, and I will take full responsibility for dropping the ball on bringing that to the table because we weren't supposed to meet tonight.
That's right.
And this was, and I should have,
We add
my
that to the list
apologies,
for next
but
week.
if we can add it to the list, we have one from a community member. It was a well-written and well-thought-out email, and I want to make sure that we bring it to the table. And
Okay.
and our next meeting is next week, correct?
Next meeting is next
Am I wrong?
week, the 22nd, which is a Thursday. I will let you know I'm traveling to a conference. I'm coming back that day. So the way the airlines are working these days, I'm supposed to come in early. But if for some reason I'm not, Kate will obviously lead the meeting as the vice chair. And this, I'll make sure that you get briefed on the setup here. And we'll have to have somebody from IT available.
Thursday
to
the
assist.
22nd, yeah.
Any questions on that? Okay, with
I'm
that,
not thinking Phil's going to be ready next Thursday, so we shouldn't expect that as an agenda item.
no, Phil, when do you expect to, I mean, do you need to take a break next week so we can discuss other items, or is it something that you feel you can come back next week and then give sort of an interim update?
I certainly can give an update next week. Preferably, we would want at least 2 weeks to start aggregating enough information to make an appropriate presentation.
So why don't we just count on next week, if you can make it, to give a brief status report? You can ask any questions, clarifying questions at that time, and we won't hold you to any presentation items. Fair enough? Okay. With that, unless there's any other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, second? Thank you, Chip. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Good night, everyone.
Only have 4. Hey, finished 2 minutes early.
Oh, and that's fine.